Hey guys, Andrew Davidson here, and welcome back to another As Per My Ability video. If you like what we do here on the channel, if you like our videos, if you like our content, if you like board games in general, please do us a favor, do all the fun YouTube stuff, comment, like, subscribe, let us know what you think about our videos, what you think about our content. Also, make sure you hit the bell in the corner so you get notifications when we post new videos. On October 31st, Halloween of 1938, a man by the name of Orson Welles, he was an actor who went on to be a director to produce one of the most iconic American movies of all time called Citizen Kane, put together a radio program in which he hired a group of radio actors, for lack of better terms, and he adapted a story, a classic science fiction story, but he adapted it in a very realistic way, where it was like news bulletins, flash bulletins, let's go live to someone, reporting, and made it incredibly realistic. Now, this caused the entire country to really get involved into what Orson Welles was doing. Orson Welles was doing a story about an alien invasion destroying major parts of the city on the coast. People thought it was real, and here's why. Back in the 30s, radio, and even today, but in the 30s, there was no television. Broadcasting really relied on advertising. Every 2 to 3 minutes, an ad would come on to promote Dinty Moore or some toothpaste, or I don't even know. So ads were constantly in radio back in the 30s. What made Orson Welles' production is that the production team that he worked with had a special arrangement with CBS Radio Broadcasting that their dramatization team would not be interrupted by commercials. That means that Orson Welles had 60 minutes to be able to play out this whole dramatization without any commercials. And that, my friends, is what sold America. Because if Americans were listening to a radio program about the invasion and about how America is being attacked by aliens, and then they jumped in with a commercial every 2 seconds, it would have lost its immersion. People would have thought, okay, maybe I'm listening to something fabricated. But since there were no interruptions, this had never been done before. This was completely unprecedented. People started getting in their cars. They started driving out of the cities. People got into bunkers. They got their families together. They started getting out of the cities. In fact, Orson Welles' dramatization of this alien invasion essentially killed 7 people. 7 people died because of a radio program that was just a dramatization of a science fiction novel. So I guess this is the first instance of fake news. Yeah, the first time fake news ended up killing 7 people. Today we're going to talk about the game that Orson Welles based his iconic, I guess infamous, radio play back in Halloween of 1938, and that is H.G. Wells's War of the Worlds, The New Wave. War of the Worlds, The New Wave is a 2-player only game, and it's an asymmetrical game, which basically means that player A wins in a different way than player B. It's not like Monopoly where all players win with the same objective. They all have the same objective. In War of the Worlds, you will take on either the alien faction or you'll take on the human faction. In order to win as the alien player, you need to just go throughout all of England on the board and destroy all the civilian tokens. There are these little tokens on the board. If you wipe the board clean, you win as the alien player. However, as the human player, you're going to be trying to inflict enough damage on the aliens to get the damage level up to 30. Once you damage the aliens of 30 points of damage, you just immediately win the game. The downside is that aliens take damage, but they're never removed from the board. So you can shoot at their ships, you can shoot at their tripods, which is essentially what the aliens are called. But they never die. They never take damage, so to speak. You just have one universal damage counter. This game is also a deck building game. So it is a militaristic game as far as fighting with each other and kind of some tactical movement and things like that. But it's also a very asymmetrical deck building game. Each player starts with their basic cards and they will upgrade their cards as they play in order to do more powerful things with their cards. War of the Worlds is essentially a very primitive game. And it's not a bad thing. In fact, I'm going to jump ahead to the end of this video and say, I do recommend War of the Worlds. However, let me delineate some of the things before you hop on Amazon and start looking for it. War of the Worlds is incredibly light. It's easy to learn, it's easy to play, and it doesn't offer a whole lot of thematic value. And I'll get to that in a second. But it's also quick to play. In fact, most games that I play usually take about 40 minutes. I know one game took up to an hour, but that's just because there was a lot of teaching and a lot of learning going on. So it's a game that's played relatively easy and quickly. Now let's get to the thematic aspect. This game is incredibly not thematic, really, at all. And I understand why the designers made the choices that I'm about to talk about. In War of the Worlds, in regarding to the human player, where you're going to be creating bunkers, like forts, ships, tanks, supply depots, all of that stuff doesn't matter. What's the damage value on all of them? 1. I'm going to say that again. 1. 1 damage will kill a civilian. 1 damage will also sink an entire battleship. 1 damage will also blow up an entire platoon of tanks. 1 damage. That's one aspect I really just didn't like about the game. Now, that doesn't mean that I dislike the game. As I've already told you, I've jumped to the end and said I do like this game. I do think people should pick up War of the Worlds, the new wave. But looking at it, it just seems like the designers, developers, they didn't want the game to become too mathy, too much math in regarding, like, okay, I do 3 damage, but then you block for 2, so then 1 damage gets left over. They wanted a very simple game that could be marketed to teenagers and families, couples, new gamers, people that just don't want a super heady game, but they do want to fight each other, right? Right? They do want to just set up their factions and their pieces and go at each other. But they don't want to be able to learn something like Game of Thrones, the board game, Axis and Allies, Star Wars Rebellion, just any other game where there's a lot of tactical combat involved, but a lot of rules and a lot of strategy and a lot to remember. There's a lot to process in those games. In War of the Worlds, the new wave, there's really not a lot to process. It's a pretty quick game. In fact, another one of the downsides that I have with the game, outside of the whole damage allocation thing, which is pretty almost unforgivable, another thing is that the game takes, so it's such a short game that by the time you do build up any remnants of, well, as the human player anyways, by the time you build up any remnants of like a military, or you start to get your cards upgraded just to where you want them to be, well, the game's over. or the game's like 2 turns from being over. I have played War of the Worlds 3 times, and every single time it's been the exact same thing. It's like I'm just ready to go. I'm just getting my cards kind of cycled out. I'm using my deck building acumen to be able to take on my opponent, and the game's pretty much over. And so that's kind of like a big crescendo to like, oh, and the game's over. So most of the time when you play War of the Worlds, and this might be because I've only played it a few times, and perhaps I could get better and more efficient at it, but as someone who plays a lot of games and knows how to operate a lot of mechanics and mechanisms within games, this one is a real slow burn, but it's over. By the time you get the candle lit, the game's over. And so the 2 problems that I have is the damage allocation. That is just ridiculous. I've got this huge miniature of a battleship, and 1 damage is going to bring that sucker down, but yet 1 damage will kill one of my civilians. It doesn't make any thematic sense. The other one is the fact that the game moves so fast, and yet you're not able to move your cards or build your engine fast enough to where the game is over. By the time you're starting to feel like, okay, all right, I'm doing this, the game is pretty much, for lack of better terms, it's over. It's like 2 turns from being over. Every single time I've played this game, that's what's happened. The game has just ended. However, despite saying all of those things, I still like playing War of the Worlds. But you know what? I think War of the Worlds, the new wave, is a game that knows its place. It knows what it is. And the designers, they knew what they wanted it to be. They didn't want to add in all these arbitrary, mathy damage things or all these extra strategic things that you might see in Star Wars Rebellion or in Axis and Allies. They wanted it to just be a really freaking simple game for 2 players to play that has a, for lack of better terms, a combat feel to it. This is basically where I'm going to leave us. I think it is a really good game for light gamers, for people that don't want to learn a whole bunch of rules, for people that don't mind the disconnect with the damage allocation and how those mechanisms work. I think it's a good game for families to buy for their teenagers. Like I said, it is a 2-player asymmetrical game, so you can always play like the best of 3 and have people swap sides and do tournaments and things like that. The game does not take long. And so, yeah, despite my complaints, I still am going to keep War of the Worlds, and I am still going to play it again in the future, because I'm constantly meeting new people and I'm constantly teaching new games, and I think this is a good one to have on my shelf that I can go, hey, you know what? We could play War of the Worlds. I could teach that. I can teach that sucker in 5 minutes, and we can play in under an hour, and we can have fun and be done. So that's everything that I have to say about War of the Worlds, the new wave by Gray Fox Games. This is where I'm going to leave us. Once again, my name is Andrew Davidson. You have been watching As Per My Ability, and I will see each and every one of you at the next video. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope to see you guys all again at the next video.